Hello and welcome to the first ever installment of the HAND podcast, the High Tech and Neurological Disorders podcast. My name is Hugo Greenhill,
Hi guys, I'm Sai.
and we are your hosts for today's episode. We're going to be talking briefly about high tech solutions, and we'll have a variety of other hosts in future episodes. We're part of the education team of HAND Club at UCLA.
Yeah, so what HAND is basically we're an organization that wants to kind of bring exposure to certain neurological diseases and really just help like the younger generation figure out what they're interested in, see if they're interested in neuroscience, and then try to get them some exposure to the field. And so for us, our podcast is really just meant to kind of teach beginners and people that are new to neuroscience, just kind of go through the basics, just get them interested and we're learning right alongside you guys. So, and we all think this is gonna be a really fun podcast. Um, and so the goal of our club as a whole and the podcast is to raise awareness and provide education on neurological disorders. And then we also have an innovation team that's actually currently working on a prototype for a patent that will help Parkinson's disease patients control their tremors a little bit. So that is also one of our main goals for HAND. One of Hand's main goals are yeah, one of Hand's main goals is to help undergrads get involved with certain initiatives and organizations, right? And it's not hard. A lot of universities have departments where you can conduct research on neurological disorders, and uh, if you want to get involved, all you have to do is really search it up on Google, and you can find most of the programs. One specific one that is not involved with the college is an 8-week summer internship or research program with the Institute for Public Health. So if you guys are interested in that, go ahead, just search up Institute for Public Health, Aging and Neurological Science Diseases track. And you guys should definitely be able to apply for that program. It's a great program, and make sure to get those in by January 8th. And then specifically for UCLA, because that is where we're all from, uh, if you want to get involved in research at UCLA, you guys can definitely check out the Brain Research Institute and Interdepartmental PhD program for neuroscience faculty list. So you guys can reach out to people that you guys reach out to the professors and researchers about their work. See what you're interested in. See if you can get involved.
The theme for today's episode is high tech solutions. And so before we get into anything specific, I think it's cool to mention why we even care about this and why the whole club is important to us. Not only can high tech solutions save lives, but like literally you can live longer, but you can also save lives in the sense that like someone's daughter, if your father has Parkinson's or your mother has Parkinson's, as their daughter or son, it makes it a lot easier for you to take care of them and it would allow you to have a better life. And it would allow the patient to have a better life as well. They also save huge amounts of money, direct costs of medical visits, but also the indirect costs of losing a job because you have to be a caretaker, are all things that you can factor into the cost of these diseases. And so these solutions help a lot with that. And to me personally, I think it's just really cool how technology and medicine have really merged and how those things are moving forward and how they can better lives because it's important to see how technology really improves our lives.
Yeah, and we're really going to talk about a lot of solutions that really combine a ton of different fields. So all this, like the future of medicine is interdisciplinary, and like we're going to learn about a ton of different topics, and we're going to talk about a few of those solutions today that combine like computer science, neuroscience, virology, things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting all of the ethical dilemmas that you
Mhm.
encounter with technology and medicine, which we do actually talk about later with our interview guest for this episode.
Yeah.
Okay, so next we have external solutions. I think this is my okay. Um, so talking about a specific solution, starting right off, there's a huge range of external solutions. So things that do not require invasive surgeries or procedures, um, very simple technologies that can change lives, such as wheelchairs. You know, an automated electric wheelchair can change someone's life by giving them independence and freedom and mobility. Something even like a walker, which doesn't even have any real electronics in it, is still a technology that changes lives. Um, and so it's really interesting how those tiny things can make a huge impact. But then if you look more into high tech solutions, there's engineered solutions that specifically solve issues like the I Stop Shaking device that Tiffany Chen has developed with her with hand, and that glove that she has for Parkinson's disease patients will help provide tremor relief so that they can function more readily in everyday life. And then finally, you can also look at things like Apple Watches or fitness watches that have fall detection. And those tiny little additions to an already high tech solution or like an already useful device can literally save a life. It can provide peace of mind. It can alert first responders. And on top of that, we interviewed, well, we had a talk with Dr. Bronstein, UCLA Parkinson's disease researcher, and he says that his patients that have watches that can test their tremors can give him a 7 day or 14-day summary of their tremors and see how they're doing, which helps a lot with daily care of patients.
Yeah, absolutely. And like this technology, isn't this useful for like curing diseases or helping people? Like it's useful for like detection, and we're seeing that today, like with Dr. Von what he was talking about, but also like in this time of the coronavirus, like we're seeing devices be kind of adapted to the circumstances where they keep track of certain biomarkers, right? Where they keep track of your heart rate, your blood pressure, and they analyze those patterns to detect to see if you may have it or stuff like that. So a lot of these technologies can be adapted for different uses, and they're very useful.
Yeah, and it's really important to note just how important a everyday item can be to someone's life. Um, and as a student, it's really inspiring to hear that these things can be impactful. And it's really easy just to look around you every day and think, oh, how could this be a life changing device for someone? So, yeah, I think it's a really cool way of looking at solutions is just everyday items such as those Apple Watches.
Hmm. Yeah.
So another solution is a TENS machine or a transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation machine. It's another external solution that is more kind of medically inclined than just something that you put on your wrist like a watch. Um, so it's a pain relief solutions for, but wait, it's a pain relief solution that works by stimulating nerves in the area of pain so that the nerves release endorphins that block the pain messages. And so it's a non drug pain relief solution. So you don't have to take pain relief medications, which we all know have lots and lots of side effects and terrible considerations that come with them. And it's really useful for reducing pain from many sources, such as chronic back pain. And even though it hasn't been proven to work for everyone, it's non-invasive and low risk and fairly cheap because you simply paste electrodes onto your area of pain. So it's really interesting just to see how non-invasive methods can be impactful and still influence the nervous system from outside. And these solutions are popular and very important for people that have long-term chronic pain.
Yeah, and like you said before, Hugo, like something like the TENS machine, it's not going to cure you of the disease, or it's not going to fix what's really the underlying cause, but it is going to improve quality of life, which especially as you get older and older, and as you get closer to the end, like it's very important that each and every day takes on more importance. So something like the TENS machine, where it's non-invasive, low risk, is definitely very appealing and can be super useful in the future as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important, again, like you said, to note that like obviously you're not curing any like issues that you have by reducing your pain.
Hmm.
And it's important to note that those things can be solved with more complex medical solutions. But it's also really cool to look as people who are don't have medical degrees, how you can also have an impact on people's lives with a medical problem. So like something like Parkinson's, Tiffany does not have a medical degree, but she can improve lives with the glove, right? And it's important to see that that's possible.
And another high-tech solution that we wanted to discuss today, actually something that's been being considered for use on the dorsal root ganglion. So the dorsal root ganglion is a cluster of neurons in the dorsal root of a spinal nerve, and that dorsal root is responsible for the transmission of sensory messages from certain receptors to the central nervous system for a response, right? And that this the one we're going to talk about today is that the dorsal root transmits messages from pain receptors specifically, right? So one treatment that we're going to talk about is stimulation of that dorsal root ganglia for the management of complex regional pain syndrome. So what complex regional pain syndrome is it's a pain condition where nerves are overly sensitive, and then something like just being touched or just very extremely light stimuli becomes extremely painful, right? So almost anything can hurt you, like every second is painful, right? So the cause is not we're not certain what the cause is, but scientists believe that it occurs as a result of dysfunction in this central nervous system, often immediately following injury or trauma, right? So the high-tech solution that we're here to talk about today is an implantable pulse generator with electric leads that's threaded into the epidural space and from there into the intervertebral foramen. Right now, each lead is tipped by electrodes that are placed over the dorsal root ganglion, and then stimulation or basically electric currents is applied, and that stimulation can help block or dull the pain sensory signal. Right. So the study that was done on this, because it's not fully developed and it has huge benefits, but it's not fully developed, and we want to make sure we minimize side effects. Right. So the study that was done showed significant reduction in self-reported pain. About 62% of people said that, and this pain relief typically lasted almost up to a full year in most subjects. And then also, throughout the study, there were relatively mild side effects. So far, it seems relatively low risk. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
it's
so
really
there's
cool.
just an example of
Oh,
one of these high-tech neuro solutions that we've been talking about. Go ahead, Hugo.
I was just gonna say that like the leads that go in and provide an electrical stimulus, like that solution is so important for neurological like high tech solutions, and we see it in so many other um, different solutions that are not these dorsal root ganglion stimulators. Um, so yeah, this is a really cool solution, and this is just one example of a kind of technique that's used very broadly.
It's using a ton of different treatments. And another thing I wanted to note is just the interdisciplinary nature of treatments like this. This isn't biological. This is electrical engineering. This computer science. So a lot of this is you're going to need to know a ton of different topics, and a lot of different researchers are working together to make things like this happen. And this is the future of medicine, really.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, obviously, technology is taking over everything, but like I mean, high like electrical engineering is really taking over so many fields, but it's it is especially impactful with medicine. And I think with like software engineering and hardware engineering, like sometimes you hear bad things about them with like big tech companies like Facebook, but like clearly this is like super impactful and super important.
Hmm.
So a more invasive nervous system solution is an implanted neuroprosthetic, such as cochlear implants, which stimulate the cochlear nerve. So basically, instead of using your normal function of your ear by using the hair cells and then uh, transfer acoustic sound into an electrical impulse in your nerve, it basically bypasses that to create sound basically. So like you're not just amplifying sound like a hearing aid, you're actually creating a nervous signal that would not have been there otherwise. And so basically, an external microphone is attached with a speech processor, and they're linked to a transmitter and are positioned on the inside of the device. The microphone then picks up the sounds, and it's analyzed, digitized, and then sent to the transmitter, which can code and a signal to send to the receiver, which the receiver is then placed under the skin on the temporal bone, um, which is which has electrode arrays. So the receiver has several electrode arrays attached, and the receiver collects that signal transmitted by the microphones and stimulates the auditory nerve to create that nervous signal. So this is really where you see like electrical engineering is like these electrically engineered hardware is like implanted in you, which seems pretty sci-fi, but you really see these solutions are growing. And we talk later about deep brain stimulation, which is even more mind-blowing. And really, like you hear about Elon Musk with this whole what does he call it? The Elon Musk
I don't know what he calls it, but it's like you implant a chip in your brain and then you can it's basically Bluetooth in your brain, honestly, but it's crazy. And then specifically with the cochlear implant, like what's crazy is that everything that Hugo just described, all these different steps and processes, they happen so quickly because when you hear it almost immediately and then you respond. So all this stuff happens in less than like a tenth of a second, which to me is just ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, all these solutions are so mind-blowing. And more sci-fi stuff is really showing up, you know, like the
Mhm.
Neuralink stuff we were talking about with Elon Musk.
So one of the main neuroscience solutions or neurotechnology solutions that we see today is deep brain stimulation. And this is super common. It's being adapted to be used for a ton of different diseases and a ton of different issues. And the way it works is it works by interrupting the irregular and disorganized signals that is caused by diseases such as Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, stuff like that. And it's a super high risk, high reward treatment. And so it's definitely a personal decision based on each patient who needs it. It's definitely a personal decision, and not every patient is at the point where they can actually get the electrodes required for DBS implanted in them. And yeah, so the specifics of the treatment really differ based on the condition of each patient. And so far, the FDA has approved it as a solution for Parkinson's, epilepsy, OCD, and dystonia. But there's huge benefits and there's so much more that they can do with it.
Yeah, and I think it's worth noting with DBS, the real like risks of it, because you do have to get a surgery that implants an electrode into your brain. And also, if you miss, you know, you like the surgeon misses, you can have side effects because those signals, those pulses, can affect tissues around the area you're trying to improve. And so, yeah, and as the technology improves, obviously those are becoming less and less high risk because um, the electrodes are becoming better and better at directing their signal towards a specific part of the brain. But I think that's really worth mentioning.
Yeah, and there's actually a new form of deep brain stimulation that's called closed loop deep brain stimulation that can actually help prevent the overstimulation or other issues that can cause side effects and brain tissue damage. And what CLDBS involves is that it quantifies the clinical state of the patient and in order to provide the correct stimulation, right? So it involves identification of research for this involves identification of biomarkers that can help quantify the clinical state, and then based on that clinical state, um, they will determine the correct brain stimulation pattern to use and things like that. So studies have examined one of the simpler methods that studies have examined is on and off stimulation strategies, where basically DBS is triggered on or off when the measured activity crosses a desired threshold based on like what we're doing, right? And there's also many other more complex methods being examined as well, just because CLDBS means it's completely automated and you know you want to get it right. because you want to prevent side effects and brain tissue damage while also getting all the benefits that DBS has to offer, right? And now we talked earlier about some of the diseases that DBS has been approved as a solution to, such as Parkinson's and epilepsy. But for CLDBS, you can widen it to a whole other level, right? This can be used to address addiction, chronic pain, cluster headaches, dementia, depression, MS, Huntington's disease, stroke, and more, right? And just the huge variety of diseases and disorders that brain stimulation has the potential to address is like ridiculous. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, this is also super cool because like you start involving crazy software engineering alongside it, right? Because you have this whole AI part that decides your clinical state and then alters your treatment.
Yeah. And I want to stress that a lot of these treatments are super far in the future. Like there's a ton more research to be done about it, just to make sure that we really reduce the risk of side effects and like especially fatal side effects. We want to make sure that it's safe as possible. And that's why a huge part of what we're going to be talking about in our podcast is ethics, the ethics of certain technologies. And as technology and medicine continue to converge and move forward together, we're going to see a lot more of these ethical problems.
Yeah, and we certainly talk about that a lot more as we interview Tiffany.
Hey everyone, and thanks for tuning into the HAN Podcast Rare Disorders segment. My name's Sasha.
My name's Shruti.
As a brief overview of what this segment's going to be about, the Rare Disorders segment is basically an opportunity for us to give you bite-sized information about rare neurological disorders, provide firsthand accounts of individuals with these disorders, and discuss relevant treatments. So what's today's rare disorder, Shruti?
Well, Sasha, today's rare disorder is multiple sclerosis, or MS. And it's basically a disabling disease which attacks the connective tissue transmitting signals between the brain and the body on a biological level. So the immune response causes degeneration of the myelin sheath in neurons, which then causes the permanent damage or deterioration of their neurons. And then this can impact patients because it can lead to symptoms such as vision loss, fatigue, impaired coordination, and pain.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Can you go more in depth about what this myelin sheath is?
Well, basically, the myelin sheath is just an insulating sheath that forms around neurons. But this all is really abstract. So let's discuss the day-to-day in the life of an actual person diagnosed with MS.
So this is going to be an anonymous firsthand account of an individual with MS. In the future, we hope to have guests on this segment who are able to give you their personal stories. But right now, we have this account from online. Some of what MS took from me back in 2001 was part of my vision in the form of blind spots from the optic neuritis. My equilibrium has never been the same, and the numbness over the right side of my body is always present. I can't feel anything hot with my right arm, so I learned early on to use my left hand to test my son's bath water when I used to give him baths, and also when I pick up handles of pots and pans while cooking. I learned how to keep my right foot from dragging when I walk and keep an eye on the drop of the right side of my mouth when I talk. The loss of strength in my right leg and arm has been compensated by staying active, but it still gives way at times and is a daily battle. Wow, so that's an extremely descriptive description of what it's like to have, to live with this neurological disorder.
Yeah, it just shows how much that people who have this disorder are suffering in their day-to-day lives.
So next, we're going to be discussing some technological advances as well as some treatments that are able to make the daily lives of MS patients easier.
So as of right now, MS has no cure, but there are a variety of drugs available to increase individuals' quality of life. So the most common treatment is an injection of beta interferons, a type of protein known to reduce nerve inflammation. This can help mitigate MS episodes.
So in addition to the pharmaceutical side, we're going to now be discussing a relatively novel technique in MS treatment known as transcranial direct current stimulation, or TDCS. That's a real mouthful, but what does it mean? Would you like to explain, Shruti?
Right. So TDCS, as described by Johns Hopkins Medical, is a process in which a constant low-intensity current is passed through two electrodes placed over the head, which modulates neuronal activity. So this is a distinction from deep brain stimulation, or DBS, as that the procedure is non-invasive, so no surgery, but this also means that the intensity of the current is lowered when they're doing it. So do we know anything else about this, Sasha?
We do. So according to another research study in the UK, TDCS has a good safety profile, easy implementation, good patient tolerance, and little or no adverse effects. So while TDCS is still largely experimental for MS patients, and we don't really have any accounts of their impacts yet, research studies so far have demonstrated improvements in the distance patients can walk and temporary pain relief. However, evidence does suggest multiple segments of TDCS is necessary to show considerable improvement. And this is just kind of bouncing off the fact that it is a non-invasive procedure. So naturally, the current is less intense. You would need multiple segments of this treatment to experience the same results.
Mhm.
So that's all for this segment of Rare Disorders. We hope you enjoyed our information. Shruti?
Just remember to tune in next week.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.
Tiffany Chen is our interviewee for this episode. She's the founder and president of the High Tech and Neurological Disorders Club, also known as HAND. She developed the I Stop Shaking device, and we talk about it a lot during our interview. As an undergraduate and during high school when she was working on the device, I think that it's important to recognize that she can serve as an example of someone who does not have a medical degree, but still has an impact on the field and is still striving to make an impact on people with Parkinson's disease with her device. I hope you enjoy our interview. I thought it was really interesting, and we covered a variety of topics.
So why don't we start off with an introduction? So just introduce yourself, major, year, anything else?
Yeah, of course. This is so weird that my voice is going to be recorded. All right. Hello. Hi, I'm Tiffany Chen, currently a second year undergraduate at UCLA, majoring in molecular, cellular, developmental biology, and minoring in biomedical research. And I'm happy to join everyone here today. I'm excited for our discussion.
Sweet. And so how do you see your career going? What's your kind of path looking like?
That's an interesting question. So how do I see my career going? I think that's also a pretty broad question, but I would like to envision it being, college, so undergraduate, 2 more years, and then medical school, whether that's, taking a gap year or going straight through. And I guess that's like 7 years of my life, 9 years of my life planned out there. But I guess during medical school, I would love to be able to do, research. I always see a lot of like MD, PhD students around campus. And even now, like I'm talking to really cool people, they're in medical school studying hard, but they're also doing so many like cool, innovative research. They're writing papers, new findings. And I would like to be able to do that, like learn the science while also trying to bring the field forwards. And I think that's what, HAND is doing here is like enriching our members with knowledge about neurotech, neurological disorders, while also taking action, whether that's through our seminars in the community or through our innovation team. So I would definitely like to keep that going in my future career.
Awesome. And so obviously you have this I Stop Shaking device, and that was kind of this idea for HAND, it seems like, came out of. Can you explain how you start, like what was your inspiration to start the I Stop Shaking device, and then how that developed into a club?
Sure. So I Stop Shaking, really the idea started back in late 2015. And it started when my dad, he was on a business trip. And when he came back from his trip, he told me, I was sitting next to a man who had this like terrible shaking. He could like barely feed himself during lunchtime, and throughout the flight, he was just, his leg was just shaking, and it was hitting the tray table. And at the beginning, my dad was kind of like, oh, like, this is kind of like a little bit bothering me. But then eventually he asked the man, like, are you okay? Like, what's going on? And then he explained that he had Parkinson's disease. And for me, I think this is probably the first time that I've heard of the disease, or we've met someone with the disease. And it was pretty not interesting, I would say, but we did a lot of research, because I don't know, it was just really interesting to us in that there's someone here with uncontrollable shaking, and clearly it limited so many of his functions. And being our curious selves, and I was in 9th grade at the time, so I had a lot of free time. I was like, can we do anything? Can we create something to help the millions of people with Parkinson's, and even essential tremors, and somehow help them regain control of their everyday lives. And that started a 3-year project in that we started writing out ideas we had. It started being, I think my dad wrote down his first idea, like on that airplane on a paper napkin. He's like, how can we help people with Parkinson's? He was writing down little things, little devices that could help. And from that paper napkin, we were able to kind of shape an idea of having these hand gloves to help stabilize patients' hand tremors. And hand gloves would incorporate like these tiny little miniaturized gyroscopes. And the gyroscopes, actually, that was a funny idea. It kind of came from a combination of, we have a cousin who works in a submarine lab, and he was telling us about, submarines have this really giant gyroscope to help stabilize the submarine as it goes underwater. And I also took a trip to Taiwan, and basically there's this like 101 story tall building, and they actually, at the very bottom-ish level, they have this big exhibit of this like dangling gyroscope that kind of balances this really tall building from all the typhoons and the strong winds that Taiwan gets. And so the combination of these ideas, we were like, gyroscopes, that seems like a safe bet. What if we could shrink these down and attach them to the hand glove, and then use, some perpendicular angular momentum, as we discussed in our latest hand meeting, to counteract these essential tremors. And that's what, kickstarted the rest of the project. From the hand gloves, we moved to the ankle bracelet, into the neck brace, because we learned that, essential tremors can really happen in a lot of places in the body. Like, for example, the man, he had extreme tremors on his legs, his foot, and then clearly, as we've seen in our general meetings, people with hand movements, and even speech disorders. So that's kind of the origin of I Stop Shaking. And the whole process, I think we applied for a patent in early 2018, and in June of this year, 2020, we finally received the official approval from the US Patent and Trademark Office. And that was really exciting because we really spent 2.5 years just going back and forth with the office, because filing a patent, there can be claims for uniqueness, and you kind of need to tweak your proposal, and go back and forth, and that can take a really long time for them to re-review your application and send you feedback. So this whole thing, I would say, took 2 to 3 years. And as for hand, and feel free to ask me any questions as I go along, but as for hand, hand was born, I would say hand was born like December of last year. It was when I came home from college, and my dad and I were talking about like neurotech things, keeping up with the trends, and I told him I joined a club called Crux that focuses on neurotechnology, and we've done research with brain computer interfaces. We're entering this Neurotech X competition. Neurotech, such an exciting field. He's like, oh, that's super cool. Do you think you can build something that incorporates I Stop Shaking, and combine it with maybe the more like medical side of neurotechnology. And at the time, I was like, yeah, but I'm kind of busy, you know, on finals, and that kind of just lingered in my head. And I would say it was in March when we came back from COVID, right? We were online. I was like, what can we do? You know, this is probably gonna last for the next year. And I started thinking about creating some sort of club that my friends and I, and for other members to be able to work together in a virtual space. So in March, I kind of had the idea of maybe I can create a club. I really didn't have that much experience being, you know, a freshman. So I was kind of a little bit intimidated by the whole club application process. But, you know, I started reaching out to faculty members asking, do you want to, you know, sponsor HAND and, you know, help guide us? And I received a couple of responses, and one that immediately was like, yes, that would be a great idea. You know, tell me more. That was my organic chemistry professor, Dr. Marlius Castillo. And she immediately, you know, jumped on the train. She was like, this is groundbreaking. I would love to be part of this. And so she kind of helped guided us through the whole creation of HAND. And we were able to, you know, ask her for feedback. And that kind of gave me more confidence in creating HAND now that I had someone, you know, on the UCLA faculty that could help back me up. So I would say all of these was really like the first and second stages of creating HAND. And then, you know, third stage was recruiting my executive team. So that's Ashley, Nitin, Saumya. And at that point, I was kind of like, okay, we have so many things to do. You know, how are we going to divide this? And it ended up being Nitin creating, you know, the awesome website. Definitely took many hours of back and forth. Creating the HAND logo, that also took some back and forth. That was with Ashley and I. And then, you know, Saumya working on reaching out to the speakers. I think we must have reached out to like 50 professors, just to, you know, build connections. And even though at the time HAND wasn't really a club yet, we would kind of pitch the idea of, would you be interested? And we kind of just went for it. Because, you know, at this point, it's all online. We're like, what do you have to lose? We're cool people. Come talk to us. And then Ashley working on building our social media presence. And I believe, you know, one of our HAND members told me it's kind of not fortunate, but it's easier that you guys started off. So we started off as like a virtual learning club rather than having like a normal club operating on campus and then having to convert to like online club meetings. Because for me, I guess my mindset was just like, all right, we're all going to be online meetings. How can we make this engaging? How can we make, you know, how can we do Kahoots? You know, online seminars, online speakers, online research programs, or outreach programs. So I kind of went in with the mindset of adapting to this COVID situation. And then, so from recruiting the exec team, we then had to do, you know, club recruitment. That was pretty fun. Just that was when we kind of started building the building that HAND is now. You know, recruiting the rest of our team, doing, you know, social media, running the innovation team, our finance director, education committee, outreach committee. And we went through, you know, a couple of days of interviews. It was kind of shocking to receive that many applications. I'm not sure if it's because it's an, you know, online quarter, but we received like over 200 applications. So that was way like really unexpected for us. And we had to take a lot of time reading through everyone's responses and then carefully select a few individuals to do our final stage of interview. And when we had the rest of the team set, it was just like, all right, let's do this. And while I was recruiting, you know, the rest of our undergraduate team, I was also reaching out to like professionals to be our advisors, because I knew as we went forward with the innovation team, which is the team that's working on developing a prototype for I Stop Shaking, I wanted us to have, you know, advisors from the medical field and from the engineering field, just to give us guidance as we go forwards. And one of our advisors is Dr. Darlene Mayo, and she is a neurosurgeon, and she did her clinical fellowship, I believe, at UCLA. And she's just an incredible person. Currently, she has her own practice, treating patients with essential tremors, Parkinson's disease, and she also leads like this essential tremor support group in the Cleveland area. And I thought, this is amazing. We can build like kind of this patient network where we might be able to introduce I Stop Shaking when it's built, and also of course ask for her medical advice, since she's been working with neurosurgeons, being one herself, as well as biomedical engineering at the Cleveland Clinic. And I believe we'll talk a little bit about DBS, or a lot about DBS in a later episode. She's had experience, creating the devices for DBS and working with engineers to kind of tweak the device to fit the patient and tailor the treatment towards the patient. And then our second advisor is Dr. Jacqueline Chen, and she is a podiatry specialist. So she helps treat people, when they break their ankles or their feet. She's able to wrap them up, physical therapy. And I thought that would be really helpful in creating our ankle bracelet for people with extensive foot shaking. And so these two medical advisors, I'm hoping can kind of back us up in our validity of our research and our prototype. And then lastly, we have our engineering advisor, Lee Felsenstein. And I think our team was really hyped when they heard that Lee was joining our team, because he was one of the creators of the first portable computer.
Awesome.
So I know Archie was very hyped. I was like, wow, great. But he would be acting as our engineering advisor. So a lot of the many questions, if hand innovation members, if you're listening to this, all your questions we'll be asking Lee to help us figure out and navigate the rest of the year. So I think this is where we're at right now, and being on this podcast right now is the creation of our many committees' great work. And I'm so excited to see where our club goes and see more great ideas come through. So thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
It's so awesome that it's such a young club, but there's already so much going on within the club, and there's different committees, and there's so many people and so many awesome voices and influences. And I think that's so awesome that this kind of like virtual environment that's been created through COVID has created something so awesome. So from this experience, it's clear that you've created a lot of connections with hand and within the industry of medicine. So through creating the device and through creating the club, what have you learned about the industry, yourself, like the medical world, and like the world of high-tech solutions?
Yeah, of course. I think it's being increasingly clear that like technology is kind of the future of medicine, if not already. But especially with the COVID era of being able to track all of the cases, to be able to use technology to transport information. I think all of that just indicates more that tech is becoming a big part of our future, and especially with Elon Musk's recent Neuralink, him trying to solve many different things. It's clear that we have big ambitions, and that our world in the next 10-20 years might look really different. Who knows, we might be walking around with implants, stuff like that. So very exciting. And as for I Stop Shaking, I think the whole process, what did it teach me about the industry? Okay. I think it taught me to, as I mentioned before, when we were like reaching out to guest speakers or club advisors, it's to just, go for it. And even when it was in person, right, and wasn't, all virtual, like we would just, like my dad and I would just send people invitations on LinkedIn, send them a blurb like, hey, would you be interested in a phone call? We have this I Stop Shaking project going on. This is where we're at. Would you be interested? And we message a lot of like neuroscientists, neurosurgeons, just any professionals working in the movement disorders industry. And we managed to, get several responses. And they were interested in our work. We were able to talk with them on the phone, and that's how really a relationship or network starts to build, is you being proactive and not backing down when someone just doesn't respond to you. Because I feel like in the real world, right, everyone's busy, they're doing something, and I'm sure as students we can also relate. And it's just important to not take it to heart, and just realize that, there's it's LinkedIn. There's a million people out there. Just keep reaching out, and eventually you're gonna find someone who's interested in your idea and willing to talk with you. And additionally, like, I guess just talking to people in the industry, it's just like, wow, I was just so impressed. When we did a Zoom call with like Dr. Darlene Mayo, who's a neurosurgeon and she's working at Cleveland Clinic. I was very, very shook and impressed, especially when she talked about how she sat next to and she worked next to engineers to help like configure the DBS devices, and how she even gave me tips on how we can move forward with I Stop Shaking, and like she knew the physics behind it. She was like, hey, she was giving me financial advice on how we should proceed. And I thought that was really cool that, these advisors, these people we're talking to are kind of they're treating me as an adult, like going into the field. I guess as a freshman back then, I had the mindset of, oh, I'm just a freshman. But I appreciated that they took me seriously and they took our idea really seriously and professionally. That was a very long tangent, but I guess in summary, what I've learned from contacting probably hundreds of people, is to, I mean, this is very cheesy, but to just, go on forwards. My life is a marathon, you're running it. It's your own journey. Like how you decide to run the course is really up to you. And I think that's where I Stop Shaking is going right now. I mean, just how far we've come, from getting advisors to now having a team of 20 students working on, market research, science research, and hopefully in the next quarters, figuring out what materials we need so we can finally start putting together a working prototype. I think all of these are just exciting new things, and I'm excited. Oh gosh, I'm excited to see where the next couple years take us.
Yeah, and I think it's also really cool that like you said, you just stick with it. Like this whole idea that it doesn't matter how many people you reach out to, that if you find one person that's willing to give you that advice, like Dr. Mayo in the Cleveland Clinic, it's like, even if you find just one person out of 100, like that person can be so invaluable. So, yeah. Awesome. Okay, so then last couple of questions here. In terms of like students within the field, so like undergraduate and even high school students, for those students that kind of like dream or have ideas for solutions within the high-tech medical engineering world, what role do you think they can play like within that field, like as a student yourself within that? Like where do you see students fitting in, like either as maybe future interns at big biomed engineering companies, or even as like your own, like what you're doing now, like kind of out on your own path? Like where do you think that students fit in there?
Yeah, of course. I think the great thing about our modern world is so many skills you can really pick up, like just watching YouTube or doing your own like research. And even at UCLA, you know, you always see those Facebook invites. There's like so many workshops out there teaching you like Java, you know, Python, really anything, which is so awesome that we have, you know, undergraduates willing to teach other undergraduates. And I think all of these workshops, online videos are just great opportunities for people interested in the field to, you know, get started and to start building, I guess, their toolbox of skills, and as to how students can fit in this like biotech medical industry. I mean, obviously we're students first, right? So definitely prioritize your education and getting your college degree. But as many people, maybe many people in the club knows, like, you know, interning at big companies, that's also a good way to start, you know, building your network, finding those mentors and speaking with someone in the field. I think that's really important to understand, you know, what they do on a day-to-day basis. And if you're interested in that, of joining the industry right out of college, or speaking to a medical student who's doing research or doing something in biotech while being a medical student. All of these, you know, point of views are really important in like shaping where you want your future to go. And like, obviously plans change after college, but for me, I find it to be helpful in, you know, just asking people, how do you like your job? Like, what do you do in your job? You know, is this what you envisioned when you signed up to join this big company? Are you doing everything you wanted? And all of these questions are important to ask really now, because, you know, you're in college, you're taking the classes that are interesting to you. So it's good to start thinking about what you want to do for, you know, next 5-10 years of your life. And I guess lastly, one other way that students can fit in, other than, you know, start building their toolbox, interning at companies, you know, you can start something like your own. Okay, that was random, but I think back in high school, when I was doing the I Stop Shaking project, my business and marketing teacher, he's actually such a big supporter of what I did, and he like gave me a lot of pointers as I move forwards. And we even took like a field trip to the US Patent and Trademark Office in San Jose. So that was pretty cool. They had like officials there, and they kind of gave us a tour of their headquarters. And then I got to talk a little bit about what I was doing. But he's been an amazing source of support. And I guess their students, you know, started asking me, you know, how did you come about the idea? And they were just like, whoa, this is like super cool. And okay, I was like really busy at the time, but if I were to give advice now, I would say, you know, start writing your idea down. Just draft it out. Just, you know, spend, I don't know, hours, weeks, just writing out exactly what you want. And then like I did, just start contacting people. You know, if your parents are also interested, you can have them reach out to people in their company asking, you know, so-and-so, you know, he's high school senior or college freshman, is going forwards with this idea. Here's what it's about. You know, let's set up a phone call to talk about it. And I think phone calls are just, I'm kind of terrified of phone calls, or like, you know, like picking up like a random caller. Okay, I don't like doing that. But I feel like phone calls are just such a good way to network, because emails are just back and forth, you know, but phone calls is like dynamic, it's fluid. You really get to know the other person based on their tone of voice, their expressions. Okay, that was also a tangent there, but I love phone calls. And so like I mentioned, have your idea down, write it down, start thinking big. Who do you want to contact? Do you want to contact a company that can help you with creating your idea, and start just reaching out and growing your network? I think that's the most important thing. And I think I was also thankful to be living in the Silicon Valley, just because there's like a million startups going up every day, and everyone's like, or most everyone is interested in your product and helping you, I guess, take shape of your device. And they want, you know, an edge in, they want their foot in the door of something that could, you change the medical field. So I guess all of these tips are just ways a student can get involved while also thinking about their future after college. Yeah, those are my tidbits.
Yeah, it's super obvious that like that you're super passionate about like kind of helping the younger guys. Like people that are in high school, middle school, college right now, they're like the future of this field. And I also think it's very cool that you made this a part of your a part of hand. Like it's one of our core tenets. And can you talk a little bit about why you formed the education committee and what you're hoping to accomplish through that this year?
Yeah, and so you mentioned the education committee, right? Sweet. Okay, well, education committee is being led by our wonderful officers, Aarti and Saumya, and they've done, just a really great job this quarter considering we're a new club. They hosted, I think, 3 seminars now, but one on Parkinson's disease, one on Huntington's. Each seminar, they were asking me just really ways on how we can make it engaging over Zoom, and we tried our best. Hopefully it was, but just trying to use various interactive like games, discussion questions, to get people thinking and not just be passively sitting there listening in. So I guess why we created the education committee. First of all, I mean, the purpose of HAND is to spread awareness and spread awareness about neurological disorders, not only within our kind of undergraduate bubble, but also, hopefully in the community, whether that's, LA County, or, wherever you are, your family. And I think education committee is really doing that, from the podcast that we have going on here, which is going to be amazing, as well as our seminar and research team. I know that they're working hard every week to create something that's educational, interactive. For example, that journal club we hosted, dissecting Dr. Bronstein's research paper. I think that's going to be really important, considering he's coming to talk to us on Tuesday. So members, even if they didn't deeply participate, they'll have an inkling as to, what he's recently done. Maybe connect that to what he'll be talking about. So I guess education, it's really just an awesome committee. What can I say? But I just love that there's so many projects going on, so many different fronts that we can attack under like the education branch. And I'm just really proud as to what we're currently doing, even in this virtual styled format. So yeah, I guess that's a little bit about education committee and the great work you guys are doing.
Yeah, thank you. Me and Hugo both are definitely super excited to be a part of the work that the education committee are doing this week. And Hugo, do you have any other questions, or do you want to move on to the neurotechnology and ethics?
I think that's basically everything for mine and Chris's segment. So yeah.
All right. So for this week, we wanted to have a small little mini segment about ethics, especially within with all these new technologies that are happening. Like it seems like every other day someone makes a new breakthrough, and it's just going to keep getting bigger. And so it's a quickly developing field, but it's resulting in many new technologies, but also many new problems. And can you talk a little bit about the ethical problems that that a lot of scientists are facing these days, especially with a lot of these invasive techniques?
Yeah, of course. I think one of the questions we had outlined was how can, like I Stop Shaking complement all the biological solutions going on. And I guess our pitch is that, we are a like non-invasive solution to, I guess, patients who either can't afford the many months of surgery, or they don't want to take the risk of having something, implanted in them, or doing like stem cell therapy. So I guess we're another option out there, which is, really important for patients to have, is like oh, I only have like all of these surgical options, is that it? And I can only take, pills. That's my only option. We're providing a way for them to be able to, I don't know, write, feed themselves, do everyday tasks, while not having to subject themselves to, I guess, maybe potential side effects of surgery, or just the time and the cost of going through all those therapies. Yeah, and as for ethics, I think there's been a lot of debates. Just it's been going on. Like regarding stem cell therapy, clearly there's ethical dilemmas for members in the community, in that we're putting in stem cells, and so I think that's always going to be a discussion, because we can't please everyone, right? And it just comes down to the patient, and what the patient wants to do. And I think it's important to educate them regarding the different options they have. So I think like medical professionals shouldn't be like introducing their biases, or if they do, to introduce the other side as well, so they're not just giving one option to the patient, regarding ethics. And I think that's an important part of treating patients, is to treat them fairly and to not bring in the ethical views, or if you do, to introduce the other side and not have your mindset really influence the patient, because later on they might be like, oh, I could have done that, why didn't you bring it up? And
Yeah.
I guess just my thoughts.
I think that, like Sai said, when like as the field grows, although you do as new technologies show up, each technology has its own ethical considerations. But like you mentioned, I think it's really important to recognize that as the field grows, everyone has a different option that fits their own problem, their own diagnosis or whatever, right? Better or worse. And so I think it's really cool to look at the field instead of like as a growing problem, to look at it as a growing set of solutions. And I think that, like, although the things like the hand I stop shaking device are a really good complement to that field in that sense.
Yeah, I think it's definitely it's a personal decision for each and every patient. Like with every single patient, you have to ask, are we helping them more than we're hurting them? Or is this risk worth it at this point in time? And especially with a lot of these invasive and controversial treatments like psychosurgery, deep brain stimulation and brain implants and more, like a lot of these have huge potential benefits, but there's also huge risks that either we haven't discovered or we haven't figured out how to eliminate completely. So it's definitely a very controversial topic, and it's not something that's going to be solved anytime soon. But even with non-invasive treatments, it's definitely still a point of consideration. So like Tiffany, for example, with the I Stop Shaking device, what kind of discussions is the innovation team having about like whether they're trying to help the patient, or like what kind of ethical dilemmas is the I Stop Shaking team having right now?
Sure. So ethical dilemmas regarding patients. Well, I think first of all, it's going to be a process when we eventually have a working prototype to be able to test it on patients. Just because there's like legal legal things we need to overcome. So I think when we get there, we'll be having a discussion as to how we can try it out on people other than ourselves, but on patients really with essential tremors and PD. So I think that's one barrier that we're trying to solve. And sorry, what was your question again?
Basically just like we hear about ethical dilemmas with invasive treatments, but what examples of that are you seeing in the I Stop Shaking device, which is relatively non-invasive?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I can think of is we're planning on introducing, and Sai, I know you're part of the innovation team, so you know this discussion, but we're planning on having like a a component of the device that's similar to an Apple Watch in that it tracks, patient data. So tremor intensity, their sleep habits, exercise, diets, and having that all of that data sent to their caregiver or their doctor. And I think that's also an ethical dilemma in like patient data, like privacy, who can access really their day-to-day functions, and whether patients can like easily control who can access their data. They can say, I don't want to send it to my doctor anymore. I think it's important that we take these considerations into account when we create the device and we begin coding the software, and the user accessibility and the interface, just having choices for the patient or for their caregiver, and ensuring that they know exactly where their data is being sent to and who's tracking them, because I know that can definitely be a concern to many patients out there. That's one of the ethical dilemmas I can think of that we're currently facing. And I believe that when we actually get to work in, doing the business research, the materials, I'm sure a lot more questions would come up. So maybe we'll do another segment there. But so far, that's the discussion we're having.
Yeah, so we can see like how something as simple as just data collection, we can see the obvious benefit of that. Like analyzing that, trying to find out new information about tremors. There's an obvious benefit, but then there's also a dilemma that people are very concerned about, privacy rights, right? So things like that is just part of what the neurotechnology field as a whole are trying to battle and get through right now. And then today we wanted to talk about a specific treatment. It's called transcranial direct current stimulation. So basically it can address a variety of conditions like brain injury, stroke, and then it can also address symptoms related to language disorders, movement disorders, and people are also actually using it for mental disorders like depression, schizophrenia, and other stuff. So basically what it is it's a wearable device that delivers low electric currents to the head. And it's basically trying to reset how the current flows to specific brain regions, and it's based on where the electrodes are set up on the head. So right now in the US, the FDA has not approved it yet because of lack of clarity on international regulatory pathways. For example, like there's no set procedure and there's no set rules. And that means like you have to determine what materials to use, what procedure to use, what steps to follow, whether that's selecting the patient, using the device, or anything like that. And a lot of these side effects that we've seen are mostly mild, sometimes something like itching, headaches, burning sensation, and discomfort. And then we've also seen skin burns. And one common theme that researchers have found is that the safety of TDCS, which is the transcranial direct current stimulation, is dependent on whether proper materials are used and procedures are followed. So Tiffany, I actually had a question for you about that. How important do you think it is that we have sort of like a regulatory pathway, not just for things like the I Stop Shaking device, but for more complicated things such as TDCS and other non-invasive things that can also be used for certain treatments?
Yeah, of course. So I think like with Dr. Larisse Yang, who came to speak to us a couple of weeks ago, she talked about, personalizing treatment. And I think that's, kind of what we're discussing here, right? So how personalized should be and how much should it be sticking to this set procedure that, maybe the FDA will later approve? And like, how can is it possible to deviate from the set procedure without, raising lawsuits, ethical dilemmas? And I think like TDCS in general, I'm guessing there's like moral concerns, right? Because we are sending in electrical currents. So I mean, obviously the first one is that we're like shocking somebody, even though it's in a low dose. But I'm sure people are probably concerned about, like you said, the side effects of that. So safety, I think that's a big one. And I think that should be like what all of our procedures are revolving around, is safety. And whether that's, following the set procedure or deviating a little bit if the patient has, complications or something, different from the one that is prescribed by FDA, something like that. That's a really good question. I think with I Stop Shaking, it's a lot easier to say, oh, we can definitely do personalized treatment just because we're not, doing surgery on someone, and that, there can be potential life-threatening implications, side effects. I think with I Stop Shaking, it's just a matter of, oh, let's calibrate the device, fine-tune it to fit the patient's needs. Oh, we need to resize it. Of course, we'll do that. And like language setups. I don't know. Like it's a lot easier to tailor non-invasive devices for sure, and not having a procedure for how the patient uses this. It's like, operating a TV. We give you a set of instructions, you can follow it, turn it on, but how you want to, what channels you want to browse through, how you want to use it in your day-to-day function, like that's all for the patient to decide. But with this stimulation procedure, I think it's good that FDA hasn't approved it yet, because I feel like we still need to talk it out as to how much like surgeons can deviate from the script, and I think they still need to do more testing and more research as to how personalized it can go, and whether it's the best thing for the patients, to take like an independent point of view for every unique patient. I think it's good, I guess, in that America, it takes a long time for FDA to approve things, and I think it's valid, considering, obviously the surgery is very beneficial, but we also need to think it through, as to, if we do allow doctors to just tailor it towards every person, how can we keep track of what's going right and what's going wrong? And I think these are just questions that professionals can definitely, talk more in the coming years before we officially approve it. Those are just my opinions.
Yeah, I think like you said before, it's definitely a personal decision. With every single patient, you have to think about the risk versus the reward. And like for something like the I Stop Shaking device, the risk is relatively low compared to something like TDCS. And there's actually been stories or reports of doctors that didn't use the right materials or didn't use the right procedures when using TDCS, and people actually did not receive the right amperage and ended up with respiratory and motor paralysis, nausea, loss of consciousness. So some more serious symptoms that can also result from just improper procedures being followed. And I think it's great that something like the I Stop Shaking device doesn't have those risks, but can also have a huge benefit. And yeah, it sort of just underscores how we need proper regulations, procedures, especially for something as invasive, or not invasive, but as risky as TDCS.
I also think it's really interesting that in that article about TDCS, that it's really interesting how a lot of the countries that have less regulation than the FDA actually drive a lot of the innovation and understanding, because like in the US, it's all not allowed. Like you can't use it at all, not even in like off-label or anything like that. Whereas countries like Iran that don't have nearly as strict of regulations do actually lead kind of the understanding of how TDCS is being used. So I think it's really interesting how that like relationship between non-regulated and regulated countries kind of like drive and work off of each other. Because this research paper mentioned that so many countries that were not the US were actually driving this. So I thought it was really cool. And they also mentioned that like you need to have regulations in place for the technology to go into use. And so, but you need the technology to go into use for the regulations to be put in place. So it's a really interesting like dichotomy there.
Yeah, it's kind of like sort of like the price of lives. I think like at least in the US, the reason we have all these regulations and procedures is because we have a I don't we place a high value on life sort of, so we want to make sure they're safe before we can actually do these procedures. And yeah, Hugo, do you have any other questions?
I'm all good. Yeah, I think it's really interesting. I mean, all this stuff, and we talk more in the episode in general about these solutions and how different solutions have different considerations. But yeah, I think that's everything for the interview. So,
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to see what our theme song is. But I'm glad you guys brought up the topic of neuroethics. Considering we are, high tech and neuro disorders, I think exploring the ethical side of all of these solutions is definitely an integral part of what we're gonna accomplish. So thank you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for your time, Tiffany.
Yeah.
All right, so that's everything we have for you today on this episode of the Hand Podcast. I hope you enjoyed our first ever episode, and we really were happy to show you these interdisciplinary parts of neuroscience where technology and science really collide, and that will be a major topic throughout the rest of our episodes.
Yeah, and also the ethics problems that come with those technology and the interdisciplinary nature of medicine in the future. It's gonna be a ton of ethic problems that we haven't seen yet, and that's also gonna be a major theme throughout our podcast this year.
Yeah, and although we didn't really go through solutions very far in depth, such as DBS and the TENS machines, you can definitely stay tuned for more in-depth considerations with ethics specifically of those solutions, as well as new fronts with those solutions.
Yeah, and we hope you guys enjoyed just getting exposed to our mini segments about first just talking about ethics with Tiffany, who's had a lot of experience in this field already for an undergrad, and also our mini segment about MS, which is a super rare disorder. And it's one of the things that we thought would interest you guys. So hopefully you guys were interested. And please definitely go check out Hand at UCLA. Go check out the work we're doing, both with our innovation team and with our various committees.
Yeah, you can check them out at handucla.org online. And stay tuned for future episodes of the Hand Podcast.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thank you. Oh, go Bruins.